This is Duke University.
My name is Catherine Coleman Flowers. I'm the founder and director of the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise. I also work with an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative, and you've been following the news lately. The director of EJI is Brian Stevenson, who has a book that was just published entitled Just Mercy, and he's been doing all of the major media promoting that book. But we have come together as it relates to dealing with inequities in this country as it relates to poor people, and a lot of poor people end up in the criminal justice system. But my work in particular starts in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is where I'm from. Some of you may have never heard of Lowndes County, but Lowndes County is located between Selma and Montgomery. Selma and Montgomery are famous for the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. Most of the route, if you leave Selma, most of the route, approximately 40 miles of the route goes to Lowndes County. So it's a very historical area in terms of the history of the civil rights movement. Actually, Lowndes County's history starts earlier than that. There is an alum of Duke University who wrote a book called Bloody Lowndes. His name is Dr. Hassan Jeffries. And in his book, he talks about W.E.B. Du Bois visiting Lowndes County in the early part of the 19th century doing a labor study, because at that time they replaced slavery with sharecropping. What does all of this have to do with the raw sewage issue? Well, the problem is that this area was largely an agricultural region. Montgomery at one time was one of the largest slave trading ports in the United States. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people that eventually left that area and went to other places made their money off slave trading. And the Black Belt region, which Lowndes County is a part of, was also factored into that. And those areas were largely rural then, they're largely rural now. And for whatever reason, there was never a plan in place to put in infrastructure that would address problems that are occurring in that area, which in my opinion keeps the area poor. So I'm going to talk this morning about the problems that a lot of the third world-like problems that we find there, and I'm hoping to inspire some of you, instead of going out of the country, which I encourage you to do, to address these kinds of issues, to also look inward and maybe even come to Lowndes County to help us. In the background, I have some photos. I know you're eating, but these are photos of raw sewage. When we go out into the community, Philip and I, sometimes we see toilet paper on the ground. I mean, when people flush their toilets, most of us don't even wonder where it goes. I'm sure if you went to the bathroom this morning, you didn't think about it afterwards. In these communities, it's very different, because it has been left up to them to come up with a solution to the raw sewage issue. I got involved in around 2001. I moved back to Alabama, and people started telling me about problems they were having, not only with the raw sewage issue. This community was one of the poorest communities in the United States, Lowndes County. Right now, even at least 23% of the people live below the poverty line, according to the most recent census. And they not only were being cited for not being able to afford a septic system, but they also had the highest power bills in the country. And we got a whole lot of coverage about that. We were able to negotiate with the power company to get the power bills down. And we found out that rural people were paying more for the same services that everybody else paid for, and pay for at a more reasonable price. In terms of the sewage problem, the reason there is a sewage problem in this part of the United States is because of the soil conditions. The soil is very good for farming. It was good for plantations, but it's not good for sewage. And a lot of these areas have been settled, and then they came up with the idea of what type of technology should go in place to address the sewage later. And sometimes it doesn't go together. There was no real thought that went into what works. Because the soil does not perk, in other words, it holds water, and in our area we have a lot of clays. The systems that have been approved for usage by most families in Alabama are very expensive. They range anywhere from $6,000, we've seen them up to $30,000. Recently we helped a family resettle. The woman lived, she lived in a mobile home on the Selma to Montgomery March route on Highway 80. She was 82 years old. A tree had fallen on top of her mobile home and had crushed it down. You can see where, if you walked into her bedroom, she was in her bed at the time the tree fell on it. It crushed it all the way down to just above where she was in the bed. And we were contacted about that and the situation that she was living in and asked to help. And I went public. A donor came forth and bought her a mobile home. The donor is a former basketball player. When we brought the engineers in to look at putting in a septic system for her, because when you walked around her home, you not only saw, I mean, they must have had toilet paper that was out there for 30 years. That's the way it looked. We even saw dead rats that were swollen out there. I mean, it was awful that they were living in these conditions. So the donor decided, after the engineers came in, to move her to another location because the cost to put a septic system there, because the water table was very high, the septic system was going to cost us, they said it probably would have cost us around at least $19,000. That was just the beginning, the estimate for it. That didn't include the perk test and the engineering. So ultimately, she was moved to another area, but the other part of the county that she was moved to, the soil was just as bad. And as a result, at the end of the day, the engineering cost $2,000. The septic system itself cost about $15,000. The average person there cannot, in those poor counties, cannot afford this. So what happens, they straight pipe it out onto the ground. How is straight piping so popular now? Well, one of the reasons is because of mobile homes. A lot of people are living in mobile homes or trailers, as they're known as. Why do they get mobile homes? Mobile homes are easier to purchase. You can get a mobile home just as fast as you can get a car because they finance them, and if you don't pay the payments in 2 months, they're going to come and get them. It doesn't matter that you're living in them. So what happens is that a lot of people, when they get the mobile homes come with the plumbing. The plumbing is already there. They have a bathroom. They connect to the water comes into the house, and they should have a septic system or a sewage system where they could put where the effluent could go there once the toilet is flushed, but that does not happen in a lot of cases. You see some examples of that on these pictures, where the sewage is running on the ground, and some of these pictures that are being circulated, like this particular location, those people were paying a sewage fee, but something was wrong. And we call it a cesspool, where he had the sewage going, within 50 feet was a vegetable garden. So you can imagine what kind of pathogens they may have been ingesting, and there were children in the area too. You see in this particular case, there's a ball where a child has been playing. We have seen raw sewage that's running across the road and people are driving through it and don't realize what they're driving through, tracking it into their homes. Just imagine the people that are going there servicing cable or whatever else that's people in these communities have, and they're walking through this. And with the recent Ebola scare, just imagine if any one of those people had Ebola in those communities. Everybody would be impacted by that. And we've recently partnered with doctors from Baylor, the Baylor College of Medicine. Actually, Dr. Peter Hotez, who's one of our partners, I found Dr. Hotez through an article that was in an op-ed piece that he wrote in the New York Times. Dr. Hotez talks about neglected diseases of poverty. And along with all of this, a lot of this is related to poverty. A lot of this is related to inequities that we don't have to have in this country. So Dr. Hotez and I started communicating, and I told him about the conditions there, and I said, you know, I have a theory. My theory is with climate change, and we're always hearing about these flus that are coming from somewhere else, it's very likely this could happen here because we have all the conditions for it. We have the raw sewage, we have more tropical weather now. It's wetter than it's ever been. I've lived long enough to see some of the climate change. I can see where, when I was growing up, we never saw an armadillo in Alabama. We see armadillos in Alabama all the time. The other day, Philip and I were out in Uniontown, out in the pasture, looking at some raw sewage that was being dumped into this creek. Actually, that's the picture right there. When we were out there, we saw, what's it, a coyote? These were things that we normally did not see in our part of the country, but as the weather and the climate has changed, we're starting to see animals that generally would live in a more arid part of the country start to migrate to our part of the country. So Dr. Hotez sent one of his doctors, who's a parasitologist, to Lowndes County. We collected fecal samples, blood samples, soil samples, and water samples, which were tested. They're using a type of technology that's not normally used in the United States to look for parasites. The parasites that they were looking for was hookworm, strongyloides, and I think I think I'm saying it right, Sporidium. And we found in samples, they found DNA for all of those. Why is that important? Hookworm was supposed to have been wiped out in the 1900s. It didn't happen. Actually, I did some research on hookworm to find out that the Rockefeller Foundation evolved as a result of the hookworm infestation that occurred in the South. It was the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, and the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission is responsible for the rise of public health in the South, because the South at one point didn't keep up with the rest of the country and didn't have a public health system. But even in testing for hookworm and treating for hookworm, they were dictated by race and class. And and it was believed then, because of the racism that existed at that time, it was widely believed that black people were not infected by hookworm, and we were carriers. And as a result, black people weren't treated or tested. I found one study where the only thing that was actually done, there was a doctor, I think in Tuskegee, who sent out surveys. He sent out about 1,500 letters to doctors around the country, and only about 13 responded, and they hadn't seen hookworm. Well, you know, chances are, if you lived in rural Lowndes County back in 1910, 1920, there were no black doctors anyway that would have seen black patients. So we believe that hookworm was never wiped out in the first place. And now we're seeing evidence of that. The problem is that the hookworm does not lay eggs all day. So the technology that's being used currently to test for hookworm will eventually not detect all the cases that are out there. In Alabama, we met with the State Department of Public Health, and they refused to acknowledge that this could possibly be a problem. They said that these are research techniques that are being used, and therefore they don't think that it's necessary to call in the CDC, although the CDC was ready and prepared to come in to work with us. And we're hoping we're going to use another avenue to deal with this, that those findings are going to be published in a scientific journal, we hope, at the beginning of this year, this coming year, so that it can focus attention on it. And hopefully, I think with Ebola being in the backdrop, people would take this more seriously. We would stop being so reactive and start putting things in place to deal with it. So at this particular point where we are, ACRE has done a house-to-house survey where we've gone to every home in Lowndes County for the purpose of trying to quantify the problem, to determine the extent of how many people in Lowndes County don't have septic systems. The septic, if they're over 20 years of age, they are not even in compliance. And we're trying to determine how many people are in the household, how many bathrooms. All of that has a lot to do with what kind of technology we're going to propose. At the end of this year, we'll be putting together a comprehensive plan that has been funded by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that we hope would be a blueprint or a template, if you will, for rural America dealing with this problem. We're not only looking at the extent of the problem, but we're also looking at technologies. We believe that we're not the only place in the world with this type of soil. We believe that there are other places in the world with this type of soil that don't use raised bed mound systems that cost $6,000 to $30,000. So therefore, we're looking at technologies, we're looking for technologies that would work in our soil. And before we start promoting technologies wholeheartedly, we want to test them. That's our next phase, is to be able to test, first of all, identify the various types of technologies, then test them and see if they'll work. Because if, in fact, they do work, they work in North Carolina. They work in South Carolina. They work in Georgia. Because this problem really extends from West Virginia all the way to Texas. That's how bad it is. And this is a problem that the United States refuses to acknowledge. In addition to that, we've also found that the foundations that provide funding for wastewater treatment and the construction of wastewater systems don't build these systems in the United States. Again, because people are looking the other way and they assume that it does not happen, that this is not part of the U.S. So we've been crying in the darkness for about 12 years now, trying to make people aware that this exists. And fortunately, we were able to get the attention of the independent expert, the special rapporteur to the United Nations. And I was invited to speak to them, and it was very interesting because when I went to Washington to make the presentation, again, I went in to being formal like I was today, and then she walks in and comes straight to me and said, "Catherine, tell me about what's going on in Lowndes County." And of course, I was not expecting that, but apparently a lot of people wanted to understand how this could be allowed to happen, because the other caveat to that was that people were being arrested. Just imagine, the only arrest record you have is that you couldn't afford a septic system. And that is a problem, because a lot of places will not hire you if you have any kind of arrest record. And they may not tell you why. So really, it boiled down to they were being arrested because they could not afford a remedy. And they're not the only ones that are caught in that situation. Even landowners that live on the lake a lot of times are discharging into the lake and into the river. But they were not the ones that were being prosecuted. And more recently, we went to Brundage, Alabama, where a minister was arrested last month for not having an inadequate septic tank. And he's scheduled to go to court in 2 weeks. So we plan to go to court with, hopefully we can avoid that, but this is the problem, just to show you the complexity of all of this and how it's so wrong. Whoever sold the church the property divided the tracts up, where there's the church and right behind the church is the septic system. There's another tract of land that was sold that has the field lines that disperse the effluent from the septic system is on a whole altogether different tract. The fact that somebody in the state of Alabama can sell property like that and then not be held responsible for what they have created, and then this man goes to jail, doesn't make any sense. And the person who bought the tract with the field lines on it reported him to the health department, and the health department initiated legal action against him. In addition to that, there is, the city itself has sewer there in the area. There's a Walmart distribution center that's right behind where the church is located. There's a truck stop, I guess a service station across the street. There's a Hardee's nearby. They will not allow him to connect to the water because the landowners in that area won't allow him to go through their property to get there. That is very unfair and is a public health nuisance, but it shouldn't be, the burden shouldn't be on him. The burden should be on him to connect, but he shouldn't go to jail because they will not allow him to connect. So that's one of the issues that we're dealing with. We also went to, when we went to Uniontown, Alabama, where we saw the coyote, we had to go into a pasture, and it was crazy that day. We heard dogs because somebody was hunting out there, and I said, Lord, please don't let them start shooting because they don't know us from a deer if we are in the middle of the woods like this. So, but anyway, I tried to be brave and not run when the dogs came in our direction. But when you look out into this, it is a spray field irrigation site. And you can actually see the sewage just running out into this creek. And I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of a place called Gee's Bend. They're famous for their quilts. And there was a famous play several years ago about the quilters of Gee's Bend. This sewage treatment spray field irrigation site is actually spilling into this creek. The creek is called Freetown Creek, and it's in a county called Perry County, and the creek empties into Gee's Bend. So there are a lot of people being exposed, and I was even told off the record by one of the environmentalists with the State Health Department that they had been alerted about a fish kill in this area. And when they followed the source to see where the source could be, it led to this spray irrigation system. And they built this and put it in the area because this is a largely poor black community, and people didn't have the means to fight it. So what we're trying to do, we're in the process of partnering with a major litigation, an organization that does litigation on the environmental front to challenge this, because we feel that we know it's not just happening in Lowndes County, Alabama. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in West Virginia. It's happening in a lot of poor communities. You know, it's happening in the San Joaquin Valley. I was on a conference call where they did a review for the United Nations recently for the same plan that's in place. And some of you should have copies of the report that was issued at that particular time. But now there were people on that call from Alaska that's talking about the same problems that they're having up in Alaska. And I do tours sometimes where young people come to learn about civil rights, but when they come to learn about civil rights, I take them and show them raw sewage too. And I used to ask the question, have you ever seen anything like this before? And people would say no. Now I'm hearing young people telling me, yes, there was a group from Minnesota that said that outside in the rural communities, they've seen that. Young people from Illinois have said the same thing. So this is the reason why it's more of a problem, it's a problem everywhere, but it's more of a problem in our area because of the conditions of the soil, and also with the tropical conditions that are starting to exist, it can manifest into some illnesses that can impact all of us. And that's why we need to deal with this problem. I'm going to stop right here and let you ask me questions, because there's some things I may not have covered, but I just wanted to give you an overview of this problem. Actually, the guy that's holding his nose is the National Communications Director for the NAACP. We took them down there, and you know, sometimes we tell people about raw sewage, they think that we're not serious. That's why I wanted to bring the pictures. And one of their EJ person was with them, and she came with she had sandals on. You know, you need to wear some boots. When you come and visit us in Lowndes County and I take you to some areas, please put some boots on. I've learned how to do that. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, then I'm going to cut to the questions. There was a woman who was, she was in her 20s. She was living in this mobile home with her autistic daughter. I was called by the health department official, because some people do have a conscience, but they have a job to do. So he called me and he said, Catherine, I want you to go and visit this lady, because we're going to put her in jail for not being able to afford a septic system. So I went to her mobile home. She had a single wide mobile home. And when I was sitting in the living room, I could smell the stench from the raw sewage. And I asked her, I said, can you smell that? She said, no, I can't smell it. So apparently she was been around it so long, she was kind of immune to it. So we went out back, right outside the back door of her mobile home was a big hole. So apparently there's a pipe from her bathroom that emptied into the hole. And we went out there in that particular time, I think it was during the month of October, it had rained a lot. There were mosquitoes all over the area. I had on stockings, no boots. And the mosquitoes I had mosquito bites all over my legs when I left there. About maybe 2 months later, my body broke out in some kind of rash. And I went to my doctor, and my doctor, I said, test my blood, make sure I don't have anything. So they did, couldn't find anything. Then I had to go to a dermatologist because it took about 6 months for that rash to leave my body. Now, since working with Dr. Hotez, I've discovered that a lot of doctors don't even test for tropical illnesses. I mean, even until recently, I'm sure if somebody had come and had Ebola, people wouldn't have known about it because people weren't looking for it. So there's a possibility that I could have been exposed to something and didn't even know it because doctors in this country are not trained to look for it because the assumption is they don't exist here. And there's a very real possibility that that assumption is false. So as a result, we're hoping that by speaking to audiences like you, and hopefully some of you can come and see for yourself and share it with other people, that this is a reality that we need to address now before we end up with an illness that will emerge here in the United States that could impact people instead of coming from the countries in Africa that have been noted, it could come from right here. And there's a very real possibility that could happen.
So trying to understand, so that these folks buying land to put their mobile homes on and just not having the resources to pay for the septic because it's so expensive here because of the, so is it a resource problem or is it an access problem?
It's both. It's both because in some cases the people already own the land. It was family property and they're putting a home there. And they can't go and get the funding. The funding sources should be USDA, and also in some states like North Carolina, through the state revolving loan system, you can actually borrow the money. They don't do that in Alabama. What happens is that it's up to the homeowner to find the money, and the average homeowner don't make the salary to equate to what it would cost to buy a septic system. So that's part of the problem. Then the other part of the problem, we found that where they have sewage, one of the communities, they have a lagoon. The lagoon overflows. And it actually overflows through these people's backyards, across the street. For that particular home, the people that were tested there tested positive for all 3 of those parasites that I mentioned. And they are paying a sewage fee, and they're connected to the sewage. So as a lot of it is a lack of regulation, a lack of policies in place to control these kinds of things. And then instead of dealing with in cases like the people that did the spray irrigation system, they won't deal with that, but they'll deal with a homeowner. In the case of the guy in Brundage, we think that there are a lot of issues around that. One of the things is there's a developer who wants to buy his property because they want to put a truck stop over there. And the developer has since bought the property next door to his property, where the church is bought the property next door, and that property has the road that accesses the church. So they're really trying to box them in and get them to sell, but you can't use that as a factor to do it. We feel that we have to help him because if we don't help him, they can start arresting people in Lowndes County again. So a lot of it is lack of resources, and then there's just some terrible policies in place that are not conducive to helping. And then USDA, we were told by one of our U.S. senators that USDA sends money back to Washington every year. So instead of putting it into these problems and trying to solve them, we've actually talked to the director for USDA, and he said to us basically is that the septic systems cost too much. So until you come up with a cheaper option, we're not going to spend any money on it. So what do we do? So those are the kinds of issues that we're dealing with. So it's kind of complicated. You have, on one hand, the homeowners who may buy the property, can't afford it. We think that if they get a septic system or a house, if you buy a house from USDA, and they're not funding a lot of houses in Alabama, but if the way their policies are, if you buy a house and you need a septic system, they're supposed to finance it in with the purchase. Now, if you buy a mobile home, that's a different story. And we feel that if you buy a mobile home, they should also finance the septic system in with the purchase. But I guess they're afraid to do that because that could be half the price of the mobile home, and then you come and get the mobile home, if the person doesn't pay for it, you can't take the septic tank. So I think that that's one of the reasons why they won't do it. So it's complicated, but we feel that there are monies that come from EPA that go to the state every year. And we have found that those monies are not equitably dispersed throughout the state. They're given to the wealthier communities. I had an example in my prepared speech about a community, I think it's called Coleman. Coleman, for an example, got a loan for $2 million to upgrade its system. Hayneville, which is a small, poor black town, got a loan, was approved for a loan for $700,000. The Coleman loan was forgiven, but they wanted the Hayneville people to pay the loan back. That's not fair, because it discourages the small towns from applying, because they don't have the money to pay it back. The only way they can do it is pass it on to the consumers, and the consumers can't afford it either. So we're kind of at a standstill. And there are a variety of policies that need to change on the state level as well as on the local level.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.